Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking around to the very last talk here to listen to my talk. I call it the Pursuit of Happiness, and I'm sad this conference is ending because it's been really great to talk to so many of you and meet so many of you and listen to all the talks, but hopefully we can end it on a happy note. So this talk is about a few of my favorite studies and concepts in positive psychology, and some ways that I think that we can apply those to optimize our happiness and just be a little bit happier. So who am I and why am I talking to you about happiness? My name is Dustin Haefele-Tschanz. My pronouns are he and him. I think me and my partner hyphenated to haunt my daughter's future teachers when they do roll call. That's pictured there is me and my partner and our daughter Emmy and our two dogs. The big one is Nellie and the one that looks like an Ewok is Maud. I am a software engineer at Spreedly, which is a payments orchestration company out of Durham, North Carolina, but we live in Athens, Georgia. I haven't always lived in Athens, though. I grew up one state over on that dirt road in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. I then went to the University of Nebraska, which is probably why I'm not giving a tech talk, because the N in Nebraska is for knowledge at that university. So I studied chemical and biomolecular engineering there, and then when I graduated for the next 6 or 7 years, I worked in factories, most of which were mayonnaise factories, thus the goofy clip art that I have there. I wasn't super happy with factory work, though, for a variety of reasons. So I quit my job and did a boot camp, and so took 4 months off to do that, to learn, obviously the basics of web development. And then me and my partner figured, since I wasn't working at the time and she works for herself, we'd spend about 4 months traveling around South America, which I highly recommend because it's a super dope continent. Yeah, it's super awesome. But why am I talking about happiness? So I have been fascinated with studies in human happiness, particularly in positive psychology, but surprisingly, there's a lot of economics researchers who do studies in this as well. But I've been fascinated in these studies for over a decade, and I've used a lot of them to make decisions in my life, both big and small. And so I just wanted to bring what I've learned over the years in reading these studies and learning a lot about this to y'all in hopes that you might be a little happier for it. So what is positive psychology? Positive psychology is the scientific study of well-being, and it started, sort of, in 1998. That was the year that Martin Seligman, who was the president of the American Psychological Association at the time, put an emphasis in that association on studying well-being. And so it kind of spawned this field of study and just put a lot of, like I said, emphasis on it within psychology. This was in contrast to 20th century psychology up to this point, which was very problem-focused and adopted a disease model for studying mental health. But these two fields of study really complement each other. This is not a replacement at all for any mental health research or treatment or medication. If you're struggling at all, please talk to an expert, a therapist, a psychiatrist, even your primary care doc. I personally take SSRIs and see a therapist, and those have both been game changers for me for depression treatment, and so highly recommend. But that's not what this talk's about. We're going to talk about positive psychology. Let's start here. This is the age-old question: does money buy happiness? As a whole, in the tech community, we have access to some pretty good salaries. So what do you think? Raise your hands if you think money buys happiness. Yeah, we got a pretty good group. What about if you don't think money buys happiness? That's a good split. I like that. All right, so let's talk about it. In 2010, there was a researcher by the name of Daniel Kahneman out of Princeton. He's a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, so pretty smart guy. But him and his team, they did a study trying to compare income and happiness to see if they are related. They did this by aggregating Gallup poll data and I'm sure you know what a Gallup poll is, but they ask 1,000 people every day a bunch of questions, and they just provide that data to for folks to use. Obviously, they sell it. But Kahneman cared about 6 questions, particularly in these daily Gallup polls. One was salary, because if you're going to compare income and happiness in any way, you need salary. And the other were about feelings that the people being surveyed had felt a lot in the previous day. 3 of those were happy states. It was happiness, enjoyment, and frequent smiling. And 2 of those were blue states, which is worry and sadness. And with those 5 yes or no questions, Kahneman and his team came up with a metric to estimate human happiness. And then they trended that against income, and this is what they found. They found that happiness increased with income up to a point, somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000. Of course, this is 2010, so inflation, I don't know, probably like 80 to 110, something in there, in today's dollars. But they found that there was diminishing returns on happiness with income somewhere in this range, and they no longer saw that increase that they saw in the lower range of income. But then in 2021, so just a couple years ago, another researcher by the name of Matthew Killingsworth and his team out of the University of Pennsylvania did a very similar study, but they collected the data a little differently. They used a sliding scale in an app that on one side was labeled very unhappy, on the other was very happy, so they could have a continuous measurement of happiness without having to take these binary answers and come up with a metric for it. They had like a bunch of participants, and they rated themselves 3 times a day for the period of several weeks, and they came up with a trend based on income and happiness as well. And this is what they found just 2 years ago, which is they saw happiness increase with income to $200,000 and beyond without the leveling effect that Kahneman saw in his study. So a very different trend. They expected to see that leveling effect. They didn't expect this necessarily. Maybe Killingsworth did, I don't know, but it didn't seem to be expected in any of the reading I did on the study. But what gets really interesting, in my opinion here, is that what they did was an adversarial collaboration. And earlier this year, these 2 researchers and some of their teams got together, and they looked at both their data sets, and they wanted to evaluate them together to say, hey, what's the truth here, right? We both did studies that should have come out basically the same, right? They're very, very similar in what they're looking at and how they're looking at it, but we saw very different trends. And what they found is that the 2021 study was more accurate depiction of what they saw in happiness. And the main reason for this is there was about 20% of the population that they saw actually in both studies that with increased income only saw what they called a decrease in unhappiness and not an increase in happiness, which is based on those binary questions, the blue states and the happy states from Kahneman's research. And when they took the bottom 20% in terms of how they rated themselves in happiness, they saw this leveling effect in both studies. But it was overweighted in Kahneman's study based on how they analyzed the data and the fact that it was a binary choice and not a continuous scale. And so it overestimated that leveling effect to the total population. So it's not that the leveling effect doesn't exist. It's not that everyone follows the 2021 trend, but 80% or more of the population did follow the 2021 trend. And this is US data. These studies were both done in the US and with US participants. So this is about how we apply these things. So in this one, how can we apply this to optimize our happiness? Well, I think we've solved it. We can ask for a raise. We can all ask our bosses for a little more money. You feel free to cite this talk when you talk with them, Great data point. Just be like, don't you want a happy workforce? I don't know. Of course, I'm joking a little bit. And the following studies have more application within our control. But I just really like how this research was conducted. And I think it just gives a really good basis of just getting a feel for this research and ways that they measure happiness and things like that. So I wanted to go through it anyway. And like I said, it's one of the first studies that turned me onto this. That 2021 or 2010 study was one of the first ones that I got really interested in, so I had to put it in here. All right, so let's talk about how we use our resources, right? There is an endless number of things we can spend our money and time on. Cars, clothes, trips, concerts, sporting events, theater. I don't know, there's everything, right? The world is full of possibilities. So what should we spend it on if we're trying to optimize happiness? There's been a bunch of studies that look at this. There's a couple that I've referenced in my slides that look at this question in a very particular way. And what they do is they break up purchases, particularly, into two separate buckets. And those are experiential purchases and the purchases of possessions. And these studies asked people to rate their happiness at different points in the purchasing life cycle. So they asked them to rate it before, making the purchase, during the purchase, or during the experience, and then after the purchase and experience. They also did things like controlling for cost, because you probably can't control, or you probably can't compare the amount of happiness gained from, let's say, a trip to Cape Town, which my partner also loves that place and keeps telling me I need to go, but we haven't yet. So you can't compare that with like buying a sweatshirt, right? So you have to control for cost in these as well. But the data they collected in all of these studies and all the different iterations that I was able to find, at least, showed the same thing. And it showed that people rated themselves as happier with experiential purchases than they did purchases of possessions. And this, in some respects, wasn't super surprising. A lot of people predicted that this would be the outcome of these studies, but they also asked a lot of the participants in at least a couple of the studies to guess what they thought the better use of money was. And they almost always said possessions, and that's because they last longer, right? You buy a car, it's gonna last you years. You buy a concert, it's gonna last you hours, or a trip's gonna last you a week. So they thought the better use of money was often possessions, where when the research concluded, if you're looking to optimize happiness, as I am, experiences were often the better use of those resources. And one other interesting thing of it is this held true even when it was the same person rating multiple different purchases. So if there was someone rating a possession purchase and an experiential purchase, this held true. So that person, even in one individual, was rated themselves as happier after the experiential purchase. So it just kind of, clears up some of the possible reasons it could be. But yeah, so application. How do we use this to optimize our happiness or be a little happier? The first thing I think we can always do is rethink our budget if we're talking about shifting or how we're spending our money. Maybe we can shift some of our spending from possessions to experiences. Of course, we can't rebudget for everyone in this room during this talk, but you know what you spend your money on, and maybe it's a possibility. For me, that might be shifting to travel, or maybe seeing Hamilton on Broadway, or maybe Noah Kahan in concert. For y'all, maybe that's seeing Coach Prime with your local football team. Maybe that's Eras Tour tickets. I don't know. Whatever you like for experience, any experience will do. But yeah, maybe that can help optimize your happiness a little bit. Maybe it's the final data point that can push you towards taking that adventure. I know it was for me. When me and my partner decided to travel around South America, this was something that made it a much easier decision to take that time off work and to just enjoy myself in doing it and not worry as much about what we were spending or what we might be missing out on, because I truly believe that experiences make me happier. So, I don't know what that adventure might look like for you, but maybe this can push you towards it. I recommend it for sure. All right, for work, I want to apply these to work a lot because we all work in somewhat similar environments, and so I think we can do that. I think we can widely apply it to this group, and I can say with confidence that y'all are already doing this, because going to conferences, I think, is a great way to use whatever work resources you have experientially. So whether that's your time off for PD purposes, whether that's a PD budget, I don't know what that looks like exactly, but Rocky Mountain Ruby has been a great experience, and I think it can make you a little bit happier. So awesome. All right, let's talk about another split in spending categories. This study was done in British Columbia, thus the Canadian money on the screen. It was done by 3 researchers, Elizabeth Dunn, Laura Ackman, and Michael Norton. And they did 3 experiments in this one study. They all included these 4 categories. So bills and expenses, charitable donations, gifts for self, and gifts for others. And the 3 experiments they did with these 4 categories, first was asking people their annual income, and then to estimate how much they spent in each of these categories, and to rate their happiness. The second was a subset, a pretty small group of people that were all about to get a bonus. It averaged about $5,000, but it ranged. And then 6 to 8 weeks later, they asked them what they had spent that bonus on, and again, to rate their happiness. And lastly, they tried to be a little bit more controlled, and they had an envelope with somewhere between $5 and $20 in it, and they gave those out to their participants, but in the envelope also told them what they had to spend that money on within that day, and then they called them at the end of the day. Again, rate your happiness, what did you spend it on, to make sure they followed the rules in the envelope. And then, as you can probably guess, they split this up into 2 categories as well. So they split it up into spending on self or personal spending, which is bills and expenses and gifts for self, and then spending on others or pro-social spending, which is charitable donations and gifts for others. And then what they did was they saw, is there a relationship between happiness and spending in these categories? And they started with gifts for self, and they found it was unrelated. Personal spending more money on yourself, was not related with an increase in happiness and how people rated themselves as happy, which is super interesting. It wasn't negatively related either. It was just, there was no relationship found between those 2. They also looked at income because they had the data, and they did see the same positive effect of income as we saw in the previous studies, so that's good. It matches with what we already know. And then, of course, they looked at pro-social spending, so charitable donations and gifts for others, and they saw a positive relationship between pro-social spending and happiness. And what's even more interesting here is the magnitude at which that happiness increase was on pro-social spending was the same magnitude that they saw in their data with income. So the same amount of happiness boost that people got from greater income, they got from pro-social spending. They also saw that those happiness boosts were unrelated. So it wasn't that someone made more income, thus spent more pro-socially, and thus was happier, and it was really all income related. The happiness boost from income and from pro-social spending mirrored each other in magnitude, but were not related to each other. So that was also super interesting to me. So yeah, how do we apply this? I think the easy one is to find pro-social organizations or nonprofits that you're passionate about and work with them with your time, energy, and money. I highly recommend local nonprofits. I think when you work with local nonprofits, you can really see how they affect your community. You can really meet the people or animals or the environment around you that they're impacting, which is really great. These are a few that I work with. Athens Reparation Action is an organization that is raising money for first descendants of a neighborhood called Linentown. Linentown was a neighborhood that in the 1960s, the city of Athens and the University of Georgia used a federal program called eminent domain, and they stole their land for a fraction of the price of what it was worth. And this was a black neighborhood, and a white neighborhood down the street got much more money than the black neighborhood was, which is unsurprising if you follow any of this type of work. But what has been found with lots of research from historians at the University of Georgia and elsewhere now is that these families lost $5 million in generational wealth because of this. And so this organization is raising money to try to repay as much of that as possible to the descendants of these families. And then Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement is an organization that fights discrimination in my city on both an individual level and a systematic level, and they do a bunch of awesome work on a bunch of different things that I couldn't fit it all in this. And then Simply Switch is actually not a nonprofit, it's an LLC. It's based here in Denver, it has an awesome founder by the name of Rachel Coy, who I know. It's a good friend of my partner. And it's an online marketplace where they vet all their vendors and make sure that they basically have a positive impact on the environment or the world as a whole. And so the idea behind it is maybe there's things that you can simply switch your purchases from another online vendor that is just trying to, I don't know, make money through capitalism and possibly have a positive effect on the world there. So I want to pitch that as well. It's a really cool organization, in my opinion. But really what I want to say through all of this is find something you're passionate about. If you're passionate about the environment, there's awesome organizations doing environmental work. If you're passionate about anti-racism, there's awesome organizations doing that. If you're passionate about LGBTQ plus rights, there's great organizations doing that locally and nationally. I love local nonprofits, but I love nonprofits as a whole, so I highly recommend getting involved. All right, let's talk about gifts a little bit. I gotta take a drink of water, I'm sorry. If I can take this off. So maybe buy your friend that gift they would love, you know? Better yet, buy them concert tickets, go with them, and now you have experiential spending, you have pro-social spending, maybe you can get a 2 times happiness boost from that. I don't know if that holds true, but I like to think it does, so, you know, I don't know. Just a thought. And then tip your baristas, your wait staff, your bartenders. That $2 extra on your cup of coffee might be you buying just a little bit more happiness. When it comes to work, this one's a little tougher. We don't have budgets to give our money away, but we do have time, which is a great resource. And I think mentorship is a great way to get involved pro-socially in a work environment. There's some great talks from RailsConf this year that I have linked in my references, and I'll put in the Slack. This slideshow somehow in the Slack, though. Never mind, that doesn't matter. But I'll get those links out there. But yeah, mentorship's a great way to get involved. Or maybe if you want a mentor but you're afraid of taking their time, now you can use this as a little mental hack to be like, I'm making them just a little happier by taking their time. So maybe use it for that as well. But if you don't want to get involved in structured mentorship, maybe just help your coworkers. I'm sure there's a part of the code base that you've worked on more than other people, or maybe people need PR reviews or just someone to rubber duck or pair with. I know when I have those opportunities to talk to my coworkers and work with them and help them out, it makes me happier, and I think it can make you happier too. All right. This is the last concept. This is more of a concept in positive psychology than it is an individual study, but there is a lot of studies that back it up, which I have references in the slides, or in that page for that as well. This is the concept of miswanting. And to describe what miswanting is, I'm gonna talk about 2 other definitions from a psychology textbook called Feeling and Thinking. But those are to like and to want. So when we say we like something, so if I like a donut, I'm basically saying that this donut is making me a little happier or feel a little bit better than I did before I had the donut. That's to like something. To want something is more of a predictive word. So what we're saying is, I don't feel quite as good as I might be able to, and I think or predict that this delicious piece of fried dough could fix that, and I could feel just a little bit better. And so miswanting stands to reason that what it is predicting that the donut will make us feel better, but then when we actually get it, it doesn't. So we think we want something, but we don't want it. When push comes to shove, it doesn't turn out to be something we want. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. I'll talk about one that I find interesting, which is called misinterpreting feelings. So let's say you just get a promotion and a raise, and you're really excited about it. And then your friend, let's call them Richie, calls you and asks you to go golfing with them. And you're like, yeah, that sounds fun. I'll go play some golf. And then you get off work and you're driving to go golf with your friend, and you're like, why did I say that I wanted to do this? I am not good at this game, and I could walk like 7 miles for free. Well, what might have happened is your feelings about the promotion and raise might have bled over into your feelings about the golf invite. So you may have misinterpreted how you were actually feeling or what you were feeling those feelings about. So that's one reason that miswanting happens. There's others. If you're curious, talk to me after in the Q&A or whatever, and I can talk more about those. But basically, what this whole concept is saying is that we as humans are kind of bad at predicting what's gonna make us happier. We're kind of bad at predicting what we want or what will make us feel better. So how do we apply this? This is, I don't know, maybe a little harder to guess, but this concept is really why I find all this research in human happiness or well-being so compelling. Because if I'm bad at predicting what's gonna make me happier, how do I make those decisions if what I'm trying to do is optimize my happiness? And so I think these studies, though obviously nothing's perfect, right? It's not gonna give us the answers to every decision in our life, but it provides a framework to look through if you're like close on something, especially of like, hey, what do I wanna do, spend my money on? Maybe it's, you can use it as a framework to make some of those decisions. So, and then the other big application I like to call eliminating negatives. And the theory behind this is basically if we're bad at predicting what's going to make us happier, maybe we can eliminate things that we already know are making us unhappy and thus raise our overall happiness by eliminating the things that are making us unhappy. So it's kind of the theory behind it. It's not, I would say I haven't found good research one way or the other of whether this actually works. Like eliminating negatives may not actually make you happier, but I think it does in practice. So how do we do this? Roomba. That's how I do this because I hate cleaning the floor. And we bought one that maps our house, it mops, it sweeps. It's cut out like 75% of my floor cleaning, and it's amazing. So that's one way. Maybe shopping for groceries is like therapeutic for you. For me, it's not. I can never find anything, and I hate it so much. So ordering my groceries online and picking them up is another negative elimination that I've applied in my life, which I believe makes me happier. Automating dreaded work tasks. So like I said, I want to talk about work with these as well. For me, this is like an example. There was a project I was working on where we needed to seed our environment in a ton of different ways to really get good tests. And I really like to test manually as well as writing my automated tests. And so seeding it constantly as I was making changes was a very rigorous and I was very frustrating for me. So just like writing a script to do that seeding where I could just run different commands and seed it in the ways I wanted to look at it. So not a super complex thing, but it was helpful for me and it eliminated a negative. And then if you hate commuting, remote work, if you prioritize that in job applications or in your current job, that's one. I'll talk a little bit more about commuting on the next slide in 6 more interesting things. I'm not gonna actually go into these a lot, but these are just ones that I found fun that I couldn't quite fit in the presentation as a whole. So this one's called the happiness U-curve. It's kind of depressing actually, so maybe I shouldn't have put it on here, but statistically speaking, happiness peaks at 18 years old, and you get slowly unhappier until 47, and then you get happier again. I will say I've seen a variety of different age turnaround points. So, maybe I'm 33, so I'm right in that unhappy range there, but hopefully maybe if we can use this research, we can break the trend. I don't know. There's a strong association between close relationships and happiness. So fostering friendships, relationships with coworkers, family, if you're close to your family, is a great way to do that. People are happier the day after being creative. So if you like creative activities, I don't know what that looks like for you. Painting, pottery, coding can be creative, but sometimes not. Depends on what you're working on, probably. But people rate themselves as happier the day after being creative. Being your authentic self correlates with higher levels of well-being, and this is especially true when you are accepted as your authentic self in your community. So I think that's pretty cool. And being present and mindful are predictors of feeling happy. And lastly, this one I found super fascinating. I added it this morning because I finally found the actual study and not an article that referenced it. But they found that this was in Munich, and they found that changing from a long driving commute to walking a short walk to work had the same effect on happiness as starting a new relationship for a single person, which I found just like mind-blowing. I mean, I hate commuting and I love like walking my city, but I found that super, super fascinating. All right, that is it. These are the studies that I referenced. The pro-social organizations I talked about, the mentorship talks from RailsConf, and the studies from the 6 more interesting facts. That QR code will take you to a Google form. If you have questions or feedback for me, I'd love to hear how I could make this presentation better. If you have any ideas there, but I'm also happy to answer any questions now if anyone has anything for me. Yeah. Oh. Thank you. Yeah, I like the way you think. Yeah, walk together. So for the recording, he said that a great application of this is to buy Rocky Mountain Ruby tickets for next year early for yourself and a friend, and then someone else added to walk to the conference together. So I like that. So he asked, have I come across Dan Pink's studies? I don't remember the name doesn't ring a huge bell off the top of my head, but if it's related, I'm gonna Google it after this. Awesome. So we have a great recommendation for author and researcher named Dan Pink, a book called Drive, about a possible split in income and happiness between different styles of work. So very interested. Thank you for that. I'm excited to look at it. So he asked, where does comfort sit in all this in terms of happiness and contrasting that? That's tough. I mean, I think that becomes a personal question to some extent. Like comfort, if that's something that influences you and drives you, maybe that can be very similar to happiness. Well-being is really it's been very hard to rate for a lot of years until about the 90s when there was a lot of research done showing that how people rated themselves on their happiness actually matched up with like how other people rated them on how happy they thought they were, which made people think that people rating their own happiness was good, like it was a good metric. But I don't know exactly how comfort measures there, but I would guess that it falls in with well-being depending on how the person rates themselves. Like maybe their well-being depends on their comfort. Anybody else? No? All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.